Hi everyone, welcome to this week's edition of the Money Talk NGX Weekly Heatmap Review covering the week ended August 7, 2026. We do this review every week to provide you context on what moved the market, the actual performance of the NGX, the top movers for the week. And we also do a sector by sector analysis to see key movers in each of the sectors and to see which sector is moving forward or which one is declining during the week. And this can help you in making your investment decision. We'll be starting today's review with the entire market performance. And as we can all see, the market went up slightly by 0.12%, with the All-Share Index closing at 245,573 points, and the market cap closing at 158.51 trillion. We can see from the NGX CEO saying he expects the market capitalization of the NGX to close at 230 trillion naira by the end of 2026. We are less than 5 months away, and probably the listings of the likes of Dangote refinery might move us closer to that expectation. And if the market continues to move as one of the best performers on the global stage, then that number is not very far reaching. But for the week, move in the actual stocks beneath the green number was not very favorable. We can see that only 26 stocks gained while we had 63 decliners for the week. Since we've been doing this recording, this appears to be the worst breadth ratio for the NGX weekly performance. And from that, the interpretation is that a handful of everywhere stocks carried the whole index while the rest of the market quietly bled. So as I said, overall numbers seems positive, but if you actually look under the hood, we'll see that there was a decline in the total value traded for the week, even though the volume increased by 4.7%. The traded volume for the week was 5.359 billion shares, which is higher than last week, 5.1 billion shares traded, but the value was down 65.6% for the week, from 404.76 billion naira traded last week to 139.05 billion naira for the total value of shares traded for the week ended August. What we can see from this number is that more shares actually changed hands, but less money moved. This usually happens when trading shifts from the highly priced stocks to the low priced stocks. When I mean high to low, I'm not talking about the valuation of this company itself. I'm talking about the Naira value. So not that the stocks that moved are overvalued while the ones that moved negatively are undervalued. It's the absolute value of the share I'm talking about. We'll be talking about the major companies that moved the market for the week, and that would give us a context on how the performance might be. For example, we have Japaul Gold and Ventures that traded 904.4 million shares worth about 2.72 billion on Tuesday, August 4th, and that was about 58% of the entire exchange volume for that day. So that's one stock taking more than half of everything traded on the NGX stock exchange. There's a story behind that. What happened was that Japaul Gold was previously an oil and maritime services company, and they announced on August 3rd that they are moving into active gold mining. It's quite contradictory. Their name is Japaul Gold, so one would have thought they've been in gold mining for a while, but now they are moving into active gold mining, and they've executed a 7.47 billion private placement, which is targeting commercial gold production at their Liberty mine, and the total assets of Japaul Gold is now 37.92 billion naira. So the Tuesday move is based on this news. Now let's look at the daily performance before we do a review of the sector by sector movement. On Monday, we can see that the ASI rose slightly by 0.18% to close at 245,730 points. However, the breadth for the market wasn't positive. We had only 25 stocks gaining, while 39 stocks declined for the week. On Monday, we can see First Bank continued in his advancement, gaining 3.43% to close at 134 Naira. And on Tuesday, August 4, the volume exploded to 1.56 billion shares, which is the highest day for the week. And as we said, Japaul Gold alone accounted for 58% of that. The market declined, that's the only decline for the week, by 0.38%. And 13 stocks advanced against 40 decliners. On Wednesday, the dynamics changed with a 0.04% gain, but the selling continued with only 20 stocks advancing against 30 stocks declining for the week. The trend continued on Thursday, but the gain was quite higher at 0.12%, but we had only 24 gainers, while 35 stocks lost value during the week. On Friday, we had the second highest gain for the week, with the market closing at 0.5%, but also had the best breadth for the week and second highest volume traded with 1.52 billion shares traded, and then we had 22 advancers and 24 decliners for the week, which means the week closed on the strongest note. Now let's do a sector by sector analysis. So as you can see on our board, we can see once again that First HoldCo is leading the race in the financial services sector, not the top gainer, but in the top 5 list in the banking sector, with First Bank closing with a gain of 12.23%. We can see from the disclosure made by the company that Femi Otedola bought additional 138 million shares at an average price of 131.2 Naira per share, and this was disclosed on August 6th, which means Otedola has not pedaled down in his acquisition of shares in First Bank, as we spoke about last week, so it will continue to accumulate, and the fact that there is high demand for the stock will probably mean First Bank momentum will continue until this continuous purchase stop. We have GTCO declining by 1.54%. It has not been very favorable for GTCO in the past few weeks. Zenith Bank was able to get a gain of 1.98%, almost 2% for the week. We have DBA advancing by just about 1% for the week. Stanbic 1.38% holding, advancing by 2.47%, bouncing from the decline last week. We have EcoBank declining by 18.94%, and one of the top losers in the financial service sector, and we'll be talking about them on our top losers list. We have FCMB up by 13.1%. This is following their results, which showed a profit after tax up by 90% to 139.9 billion Naira, with a strong return of equity of 27.9% for FCMB Group. And this moved the market. So the market saw that as a positive. We have the NGX declining by 3%. We have Wema Bank, Sterling, United Capital, which gained last week, Jay's Bank, all declining for the week. So those are the major declines. You can see it's quite a mix with some red and green move in the financial services sector. Now we'll be moving to the consumer goods sector, where we have the likes of Nigerian breweries also recently releasing their account. We've spoken about them previously. We have Nestle Africa, International Breweries, Dangote Sugar. It's majorly a red zone. Let's take this to a non-market cap rate. So you can see it's almost a red zone with only Vital Foam, FTN Cocoa, and Nascon able to edge in some profit for this sector. We have the industrial goods sector with all of them also red. We also have the ICT sector with MTN and Overtech gaining, but others declining for the week. we have the oil and gas sector. We've spoken about Japaul Gold. They lost 1.65%. Oando also declining. They released their results also, and we'll be talking about them later. Only Eternal gained 10% for the week. In the services sector, this is a very red zone with most of the stocks losing, with only C&I and Cavitin gaining for the week. C&I is a very slim gain of about 1%. And Cavitin would also be speaking about them. They also released their results and they gained 10%. We'll speak to that later in this presentation. We also have Secure Electronics Tech also gaining 3.75% for the week. In the construction and real estate sector, we have Ilden McCall gaining 2.75. The other two companies, UPDC and their real estate investment trust, also declining for the week. We have the healthcare sector, one gainer, that's Nemet International, and May and Bakers declining by 7.5%. We have the agricultural sector, also a red zone. Zichis losing big, Ella Lake also declining, and livestock declining slightly for the week. The conglomerates also a red zone. In the utilities, no movers in the utility. You can see the two stocks in that sector staying at 0% for the week. We have Multiverse and Thomas Wyatt. We're speaking about Thomas Wyatt later, but this is large declines in the natural resources sector. I think soon Japaul Gold will be moving to this sector because, like I said previously, they are moving into gold mining. They should be under this sector. And so if we add them to this, they are also decliners for the week. Then on the investment sector, we have VFD Group reversing its gain for last week and closing at a negative of 3.77%. So now let's look at the move for the week. We can see that this list is only financial services sector, and now can see, as we said previously, that the market was supported by move in the financial services sector. The list is topped here by Ava Capital PLC, which listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange last week and gaining 33.33%. The stock gained 10% last week to close at 8.25% and has moved to 11 Naira per share now. And based on the H1 results released, they are very expensive when it comes to PE ratio. Looking at the actual H1 release to give a perspective on the price to earning ratio, it sits at 53.79. So which means it will take you 53 years to gain if you invest at 11 Naira. But also looking at, because that's half year. So if we project that they make double of that by end of the year, so their P ratios to be about, which is very, very high for the financial services sector. And I think this is initial momentum. Not taking a position whether it's a buy or a sell at this point. I'm just giving you these insights to support your decision in whether to invest in this is a smart decision at this current price. We also have FCMB up 13.1%. We can see, as I said previously, the profit after tax increased by 90%. And this is the market re-rating the name. And let's hope the momentum continues for FCMB. It's been a downer for a while. We have First HoldCo on our list again this week. They've been on our list, I think, for the last 6 weeks. And like I said, this is probably due to Femi Otedola's continuous acquisition of this name. We have FTG Insure coming up on 1%. That is a recovery after last week's decline. And we have Link Assure, that's Linkage Assurance, up 10.63%. And we see this as continuous rating of some of the insurance services stocks. On the losing side, we have Thomas Wyatt down by 26.71%. We've spoken about them in the previous week, so we won't be taking more time on them again. No new information on them at the moment, but we can see that from the previous weeks, they were gaining. And this is a decline because, as I said last week, there were no fundamentals driving the move. I see that as speculative moves, and those momentum could be driven both ways. We have Transnational Express down 23.75%. We can see that from the H1 results they released that their revenue declined by about 25%, but they were able to improve their loss from 58.1 million in the previous H1, that's it last year, to 46.67 million naira. And probably the market expected them to be out of the loss position, but they are yet to be out of the waters, and hopefully they can get their act together. We have critical mineral financing also down 22.68%. We can see that this is a reverse from last week, almost the same percentage move up of 22.78% last week from their first revenues that they released of 82.64 million, but they had a loss of 141.69 million. Last year, from the report they released, there was no revenue. This is their first revenue, and they continue on the losing streak. So let's see if the new investments could head them forward and make this loss a positive number. Let's see, maybe 2027 or in the coming years. We also have EcoBank Transnational down 18.94%. We can see from the release of their accounts that the earnings from Nigeria operations declined for the H1 2026, but their group performance improved. So I believe Nigerian investors were reading Nigerian market, but the stock is for the group, and then the performance or the valuation to be based on the group's performance. We also have consolidated Allmark Holdings down 16.51%. We can see that the stock hit is 52-week high of 9.04, and it has started declining after that. From the H1 report that was released a couple of weeks ago, we can see that their profit surge was driven entirely by investment fair value gain and not underwriting improvement. Investors might have investigated and seen that this investment gain might not be sustained, but that is the move in the market for this week. Now, on other earnings response released during the week, we have O&O, that's in the oil and gas sector, releasing their numbers, and we can see that operating profit was 128 billion naira from a loss a year ago of 159 billion naira. Their revenue was up 20% to close at 2.06 trillion naira, and their cash and cash equivalent was up 181% to close at 545 billion naira. Their production improved by 6. They were able to become more efficient in their production of crude oil, and that improved by 18%. And we can see that this is the turnaround story, and if you can see from the review that this is influencing the move in the stock. We also have Aradel Holdings with their revenue up a whopping 948% year on year. We can see that the acquisitions and investments is paying off. And for June 2025, their revenue was 368 billion naira. But for this period, they were able to have a revenue for the first half of the year alone of 2.49 trillion naira. That is a massive move in the company. The group revenue grew almost 11% year on year, but the EPS grew by just 6.3%. We also have SACO with their profits declining by 52.7%, even though their revenue grew by 9.3%. We can see this is due to a surge in their direct costs, moving by 63%, and their admin costs jumping by 41%. This is the same margin compression that we can see for the like of ABC Transportation we spoke about last week, and this has continued to negatively impact their performance. things we spoke about previously, we've spoken about Otedola acquiring more shares in First HoldCo. We have Japaul Gold stock, even though they had massive number of shares traded, the actual stock value declined. We have Cavitin. We've not spoken about Cavitin previously. They gained 10% during the week. However, based on the H1 results released, we saw a loss of 8.69 billion naira, and there was a decline in their revenue for the first half of the year from 16.47 billion naira last year, that's H1 2025, to 14.68 billion naira. This was due to their revenue from helicopter charter declining from 3.5 billion naira to 1.1 billion. Their helicopter and airplane contracts also declined from 7.62 billion to 4.3 billion naira. The vessel agency was the only part of their revenue lines that increased, with massively from 52 million to 3.2 billion naira. Their admin expense jumped from 2.2 billion to 6.3. We can see that their loss would have been more, but they were able to edge with a foreign exchange gain, which improved from loss from 6.921 billion to 268 million naira. The loss for the year was 8.6 billion naira, and even based on that, the share advanced, and the assumption for that is that investors are pricing in their new partnership with Esploma, which is expected to reduce their cost of operations and bring some renewable energy into the aviation space for Nigeria. This is the analysis for the week ended August 7, 2026. And if this has been helpful for you, don't forget to subscribe. Hit the subscribe button just below this video and follow us on all our social media platforms. We are on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and X. Thank you for listening today, and see you next week.